In the previous video, we walked through how to get started installing NodifyMe, and we created an LED that blinked on and off when controlled with a virtual switch in NodifyMe Studio. For certain things, directly controlling an LED manually is enough for turning one or two things on and off, but you might be wondering how to do more complex tasks such as doing multiple things with one action. The way that we accomplish this with NodifyMe is through programs. In short, programs are the way that you can combine nodes together as building blocks to do more interesting and complex things. We're going to start simple and build on what we've done in the previous Getting Started video, where we installed NodifyMe on a Raspberry Pi and got an LED to blink. If you have not walked through that video or you do not know how to download and install services, please pause and check out that video now. I'll have a link to that video in the description below. We're going to start by replacing the LED circuit from the last video with a fairly common pre-made relay board that can be found on eBay, Amazon, Alibaba, etc. I will include a link to that one as well. Now we're going to hook this up as follows. We're going to hook the Raspberry Pi 5V up to the relay JD VCC pin. We're going to hook the Raspberry Pi 3.3V to the relay VCC pin. And then we're going to hook the Raspberry Pi ground to the relay ground. The remaining pins are going to be from the GPIO digital pins into the relay in number pins. So in this example, we're using Raspberry Pi wiring pi pin 0, and we're hooking it to the relay in 1 pin. Now we're going to open NodifyMe Studio and connect to our Raspberry Pi so that we can use this relay board now. Let's go ahead and find the digital writer node that we used in the last video and rename it to Relay 1. Be sure to click Save. Now we can go to the node's view and start to control the relay manually. You might notice that this board functions a little differently than you might expect as you send an off or false signal and the relay turns on, and you send a true or on signal and the relay turns off. This functions as a pretty good example that you cannot always assume that a Boolean signal will do what you expect when sending it to another board that you don't know about. For GPIO pins on a Raspberry Pi, we can compensate for this by using the invert property on the digital writer nodes, in this case relay 1, so that the switch and the relay behave as expected. This invert property is not always available, but luckily there is another way. We can also perform the same inversion for any Boolean signal by connecting another node before this that will invert the signal for us. To demonstrate this, let's go ahead and disable the invert property before moving on to the next step. This is where programs come into play. Programs allow you to string nodes together and have data flow between them. In this way, you can create interesting automations from simple and sometimes not so simple building blocks. To get started with programs, you'll need to make sure that the nav panel is open and then select the Programs item under your Raspberry Pi hub in the nav panel. Once we are on this Programs list view, we need to click on the Add button. This will take us to a new program and a program canvas in which we can drag and drop nodes that we already have created onto a canvas and connect them together. Let's go ahead and drag and drop our Relay 1 node that we created in our last video onto the canvas. You can see that we have a block representation of our node with inputs and outputs on the sides. At the moment, it's kind of lonely here, so let's go get another service with some nodes that will allow us to do slightly more interesting things with on and off values. Let's grab the Boolean Service from NodifyMe.com by going to NodifyMe.com and clicking on the Services tab. We'll go ahead and add it to the hub just like we did previously with the RPi digital service. Now that we have our bool service, let's start it and make sure that the light besides the on-off switch on the service turns to green. If it does not, you can cycle the service host by turning it on and off. This usually clears up any issues. Now let's start adding Boolean nodes. We'll just need to drag one NOT gate and one bool source dynamic to the active nodes list in the Boolean service. Turn both of the nodes on or enabled to make sure that they are not muted when we use them. Now let's head back to the program, and we can see that these two nodes are ready for us to drag onto the canvas. Let's drag each of them onto the canvas now. The Boolean source nodes are useful for generating a Boolean signal that is later modified by other nodes down the stream. In this case, the chain ends with a single GPIO pin on the Raspberry Pi that we are sending these Boolean signals to. The NOT gate reverses that generated true or on signal to be a false or off signal, and vice versa, so that our relay board again behaves as expected. Wire these nodes together like you see I've done here to complete the first part of the program. You can then open the bool source node's view by right-clicking on the node and then selecting Pop Out Edge View. This is a live view of what's going on in the node that you can also directly affect. Go ahead and change the state of the value pin to switch between true and false, and notice that the relay is again behaving with true turning the relay on. You can see here that the Boolean signal that you're sending is being modified by the NOT gate node to invert the signal. To further demonstrate this and to also show multiple dispatch, we're going to hook up one more relay to the Raspberry Pi. In this case, I'm hooking up the Raspberry Pi wiring Pi pin 1 up to relay N2. Now we need to add the node that represents this GPIO pin and relay into NodifyMe Studio. To do this, we're going to add another digital writer node in the RPi digital service like we did before. Don't forget to set the pin number property, in this case to 1, and be sure to click Save. Also, rename this node to Relay 2 so that we can keep track of which is which. Now, going back to the program, we're going to drag the Relay 2 node from the available nodes onto the program canvas. Let's go ahead and wire this node directly to the bool source node. Now when you flip the switch in the bool source node view, you'll see that the two relays are always going to be inverted from each other. This demonstrates wiring as well as the multiple dispatch taking place from one mouse click. That is all for this video, in which we demonstrate some simple Boolean services as well as how to create a simple program. There are more services being worked on that will be released in the future, as well as enhancements to NodifyMe Studio. Subscribe to stay tuned in for all of the updates, and thank you for watching.